What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Water Cooler Talk. My name is Caleb Turner, and I'm a sports writer at KSL.com. It is March 9th. We're coming at you for another podcast here to recap what's going on in the world of sports and give you a look ahead at what you can look forward to in the week to come. And we are welcomed by our friend Jackson Payne once again, who is on the road, heading down to, you're heading to California, stop in Vegas. Is that correct?
Yep, got a nightcap in Vegas and then heading to Palm Springs tomorrow. So
Oh,
gotta catch
baby.
some tennis during conference championship week for some reason.
Indian Wells, the one and only. Y-
Yeah, better be Indian better than well because I better justify this trip.
You
Better
know,
justify the basketball I'm gonna miss.
yeah, there is a lot of basketball. It is March, but one last note on Indian Wells. Literally, right before I hopped on the Zoom call, I opened Instagram and the first video I saw was Timothy Chalamet and Kylie Jenner at a tennis match at Indian Wells. So
Chalamet,
you might run into the Chalamet.
Chalamet.
So that'd be kind of fun, but who knows?
I mean,
Um,
if there's anybody who can break down ball, it's Timothy Chalamet, as
yeah,
we've come to find out.
for real. The dude knows. He's got ball knowledge. And we're here to talk about a little more ball knowledge. As you mentioned, it is March, it is tournament season. We're kind of getting down to the wire here. Regular season's over. As far as what teams have kind of done to solidify their resume is just about wrapped up, which will go into kind of some bracketology and kind of where some of these Utah teams are slated to finish. We enter tournament season, starting with conference tournaments. The women's Big 12 tournament already began last week, and both of the Big 12 teams, Utah and BYU, early exits there in their first matchups. So a bit of a sad exit there for them. But I did check Utah women's basketball is still slated to be an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament. So despite the disappointing exit from the Big 12, they'll be playing in March here to come. And you are in Vegas where some of these tournaments will be taking place, the WAC and Mountain West, I believe, but not the Big 12 tournament,
No,
which some people maybe would like for it to be there as opposed to Kansas City. But nonetheless, that is where it's taking place, right in the heart of America, in the heart of Big 12 country, honestly, really.
yeah,
You have to find that intersection of what is a really enormous geographic conference.
yeah.
So
I
yeah.
it's bothering me that these fans from Pac-12 schools come into the Big 12 and act like they can change everything. Like the Big 12 tournament's always in Kansas City.
Yeah.
There's charm in having something in the same place every year. Like the College World Series is in Omaha. The ACC tournament used to be in Greensboro every year. It probably still should be. Like it's such a big geographical conference. The like Kansas City is literally the exact middle of the U.S. Like that's the perfect place to have a nationwide conference. Like just because the Pac-12 did things one way doesn't mean the Big 12 has to do things another way. Like it's driving me crazy. Like just enjoy the fact that you're in the Big 12 because Oregon State and Washington State are playing at the Orleans Arena in Vegas. It could be a lot worse.
See, this brings us full circle right here because you're in Vegas. This time of year takes me back to those days at the Orleans Arena with
The
the West
worst arena ever.
with in the West Coast Conference. And as I mentioned, there are some tournaments going on down there. You've got the WAC with UVU, who just checking bracketology. It's there, UVU obviously great men's basketball season for them. Slated as a 14 seed as an automatic qualifier from the WAC. So hopefully they can get through that tournament. Well, and another interesting thing I saw, speaking of the teams that are in Vegas, Utah State, who I believe at one point was something like 20-2,
Yeah.
and have since been like 500 essentially. They're listed as on the bubble, which
Ooh.
is not where you want to be heading into this part of the season, which I mean, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise because they're doing the opposite of what BYU did, which is not peaking at the right time. So Utah State goes into the Mountain West tournament with like a lot to prove, basically trying to like make their way into the big dance, which was a guarantee a month ago. So it's interesting things going on down there in Vegas, with a couple of those like mid-major teams.
Yeah, I mean Utah State, them being on the bubble, I feel like shouldn't be the reality. Like I
Yeah,
think they should be comfortably in. I think the way that they fall onto the bubble per se is like if they have an early exit in the conference tournament,
yeah,
and then there's a bunch of bid stealers in other leagues.
exactly.
But I think they're comfortably in. I think they're a 10 probably, which
Yeah.
begs the question of a possible 7-10 BYU Utah State matchup, which would be
Ew.
electric. But yeah, Utah State. I mean, this is kind of they we've seen two Utah States this year. We saw this juggernaut early in the season, and then we saw this kind of like broken group down the stretch that couldn't figure things out really. This is kind of the time to figure out who they really are. So yeah, the Mountain West is a good league. Like I think New Mexico is really good, and so I hope that Utah State matches up with them again because that'd be a really fun game. And then UVU, I mean, like historically, UVU can't win the big one.
Yeah.
That's just kind of how it is. And so hopefully this year they can get over the hump and finally make the NCAA tournament. Because could you imagine a 3-14 matchup of Kentucky UVU with Mark Pope? That would be so awesome.
That would be crazy. Yeah, so we're kind of looking at the possibility here of three men's basketball teams from the state of Utah making the tournament, obviously with some work still to do this week. But you look at UVU, you look at Utah State, and then obviously the one that is guaranteed essentially at this point would be BYU, which to kind of wrap up our bracketology talk, it's looking like I mean the latest bracketology has BYU as a 5 seed, which would really be something. It would, especially from where that team came from early in the season to get all the way to a 5 seed. Obviously, it kind of depends on what happens this week in Kansas City, like you mentioned, Big 12 tournament. BYU doesn't know their opponent yet. They get that first round bye. They'll play in the quarterfinals. Utah, however, does know their opponent. They're playing UCF on Tuesday. So BYU coming into that tournament, 8 wins in a row, winning what is it, 12 of their last 14.
I believe so, yeah, because they lost two in a row before the 8 game winning streak, and I think they'd won two in a row before that. So I think
Yeah.
it's
Is
10 of
it 10
10
of
of
12?
12.
Yeah,
Yeah.
10 of 12. There you go.
So math. Well, look, we're journalism majors. Math isn't our thing.
But still, I mean, to go 10-2 at this point in the season when it matters the most, we got to talk about this last week for BYU to close out the regular season, win at Iowa State,
Mm.
double overtime
Double overtime.
as our side talk friends in New York City would be very, very proud of. Knicks fans, not Boston fans. They don't like them out there,
No, they
and
don't like Trey Young either.
they don't like Trey Young
If you know,
either.
you know.
I actually know a guy that got onto a side talk video this week. It was kind of like a cheap way of doing it. He works for Shake Shack in the corporate headquarters, and Shake Shack did like a collaboration with the side talk Instagram account as like an advertising
Ooh.
campaign. So it was like not the best way to get on, but
Yeah,
technically I know a guy that was on side talk, so that's kind of fun.
it's a little sus. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not crazy about that.
Yeah, yeah.
But hey,
Well,
game is game.
it seems like side talk's selling out a little bit, which is sad. But shout out Kyle for getting on side talk. Um, and
Kyle is the perfect side talk name. Side note.
literally though. I think I kind of lost the plot there on where I was going. Yes, this week for BYU,
Yeah.
double overtime win, and then a great game at the Marriott Center last night against Utah to close out their kind of a disappointing regular season. I think firing their head coach in Craig Smith for Utah. But they bring on a great alumnus
Whoa.
in Alex Jensen. I was thinking Utah women's basketball. Okay, they're
Okay.
they're, they're the more important story here, Jackson.
Yeah, yeah. And don't
But
forget BYU women's basketball got to find a coach too.
that's true. That's true. Their season, like I mentioned, early exit there from Big 12, and they fire Amber Whiting. So
Yeah, not surprising.
Lee Kamard, which we kind of predicted, he might just like end up taking the job. He's interim right now.
Yeah,
But we're big fans of Lee,
yeah. Lee's the man.
BYU legend. So shout out to him. But yeah, I mean, just I guess you were at the Marriott Center last night, coming off that win at Iowa State. Like seemed like BYU emptied the tank there in double overtime, and
Yeah,
yet somehow finds a way to come back and play against like a Utah team that has like nothing really to play for. Like they're just
yeah,
playing for like their pride at the end of the season, essentially.
yeah. I think it's hard to kind of make any judgments from playing Utah because Utah's season is so weird. They're on an interim head coach. They're not going to the tournament. Just kind of like you're waiting for things to end essentially, but you also want to like make the most of it. And plus, like you got Caleb Lohner and Hunter Erickson playing for Utah. It's senior night at BYU. They started their careers at BYU. They're seniors. Like
Yeah,
there's a lot of senior night emotion on the BYU side. BYU emptied the tank, as you said, in double overtime against Iowa State. And then they got delayed. They were stuck in Iowa for a day, which is
that's
like,
right. Yeah,
I mean, how many states? there's probably like 48 other states I'd rather be stuck in than Iowa. No offense, Kansas, but yeah, like I think so. I think their routine probably got thrown off a little bit from that. Their senior night emotions and kind of heaviness there, and Utah. I mean, like no matter like the box score, like BYU was much better than Utah yesterday. The box score is not going to suggest it, but like you just have to. Rivalry games are an eye test thing, right? Like when BYU beat Utah in 2021 in football, it was a 9-point win. But if you watch the game, it felt more like 30 points.
Yeah,
Like that's just these two teams are always kind of slug it out and hang around with each other. And I think something Kevin Young said yesterday in the post game, which was really interesting, was he said that the best practice that BYU had all year was their first practice after the Iowa State game.
dang.
Or I think it was their practice right before Utah. And I was thinking like, okay, you just beat a top 10 team on the road
Right.
in double overtime to clinch a double bye. Like you're playing for nothing essentially against Utah. Like that game was as meaningless as a Big 12 game could be really in terms of standings and postseason implications. But they still had their best practice of the year. Like that says a lot to I think where this team is at and kind of how well they're clicking right now with hot take. I think Cannon Catchings either being limited or being out with his injury is one of the better things that could happen to BYU in March because it really tightens up that rotation and defensively it helps BYU a lot. Nothing against Cannon, but like defensively he wasn't getting the job done, and so I think BYU's clicking really well. It might not have seen it like it at times against Utah, but like I said, that's such a weird game to judge things on.
Yeah.
They're at the exact perfect place any team could want to be heading into March, in my opinion. Like they're on a roll. They figured out who they are. They have this crazy belief in themselves. Like any team should be scared to play them in the first round. Like there's all the bracketology that I've seen. Like there aren't a ton of first round matchups for BYU that like would frighten me personally. Maybe like VCU, but like I don't know. Like BYU's in a great spot. I think they're going to finally break this curse of not winning a a tournament game since the days of Mac Tarlino and Brandon Davies. Like it would be awesome to finally get into the round of 32 for BYU. And so I think this is the year they do it. And man, what a great way to end the regular season. I mean, 8 straight wins. Who would have thought a month ago where this team would be?
Not us.
Not us. I mean, dude, we basically like buried this team early a few weeks
Yeah.
ago. I was like, yeah, we don't know who they are. Like, probably on the bubble. Just play for next year, basically.
Well, and like the thing that the one thing that I can kind of take away, I think, from last night's game is it was a slow start, which makes sense coming off of what you just mentioned, like the double overtime, the delay, and all that. Slow start for both teams, and like didn't look great, kind of lethargic, whatever, not making a lot of shots, turnovers here and there. But to turn it around and kind of like little by little, minute by minute, quarter by or not quarter, half by half, I guess. Make your way, get comfortable in the game, and kind of
Yeah,
get back to what you're good at, which is like I know we've mentioned this before on the podcast, but like the opposite of kind of what those Mark Pope teams were known for, which was like these like vibes and like feeding off
yeah,
energy, which for a team like that, if they come in lethargic and they just don't have the energy from the start, it's probably just not going to happen on that night for them. They just don't have the vibes that night. Whereas a
yeah,
more professional type ran team, a more experienced team, which you mentioned the senior night, a lot of seniors on the team, they're able to compartmentalize and say, okay, we had a slow start, but like we're still in this. We just got to stick to our game plan. And whatever that game plan is that Kevin Young is instilling, obviously the guys are buying in, and they're sticking to it because they're able to get these kind of like grind out wins, which over the full 40 minutes they're able to put together a complete game, which you don't always see from a college team, especially one with like some younger players on it.
yeah. I'm not trying to bash Mark Pope at all because I'm a Pope guy, but like, how many big games did you see BYU like come out swinging like firing on all cylinders early and then just kind of like slowly collapse?
Yeah,
Like it was just kind of like it's like a boxer that gets all the first punches and then can't really figure it out at the end. Like gets hit a bunch and the better boxer kind of waits their turn. Kevin Young, like my buddy Ryan McDonald at Deseret put out a stat yesterday. Over the past 3 games, BYU is averaging 11 points per in the first 12 minutes of each game. So at the under 8 timeout, it's
crazy.
11 points. So really slow starts for BYU, which they got to figure out before the postseason. But
Yeah,
like, to finish the way they did, I mean, they got to. I mean, how bad was that? Like they're having 50-point halves after halftime. Like Kevin Young after the timeout is elite. Like what they draw up after timeouts
yeah, yeah.
is really solid. Like the way they adjust at halftime, like I mean,
Hmm.
this BYU coaching staff has become exactly what we thought it was going to be. Where like they're just so strategically elite. They can dissect exactly what needs to happen in order to score, in order to lock you down defensively. The rotations aren't spit out by a computer. Like they're very much based on matchup. And like it's just I think I likened it to like a baseball manager knowing how to use its bullpen effectively. Like
Right.
that's kind of how it's been with Kevin Young lately. Like after the timeout, he is so good. Second half adjustments, they're great. Like this BYU team is just so like tactically incredible at this point. So, and that's great for March, right? Like sometimes you got to out scheme your way to a win.
Yeah, and like just looking at this Big 12 tournament bracket, if I'm reading this right, like it looks like BYU could match up once again with Iowa State.
Oh yeah,
If which would be a fascinating rematch after that double overtime game. Which like that's what you want in March though. Like you want the buzzer beater, you want the overtime game in March. So that could be a lot of fun. As I mentioned, Utah already knowing their opponent first round against UCF. If they move on, they get Kansas in Kansas City, which
Ooh.
could be some fun times for the interim head coach in that squad. But BYU, you get two buys, you kind of get to rest up. You mentioned a couple injuries here and there for them, kind of get your squad right after what was a pretty hectic final week of the regular season, and you don't have to play till Thursday, so you've got almost like the entire week to just kind of rest, figure some things out. And you know most likely who your opponent is going to be already because the other two teams on that side of the bracket are Cincinnati and Oklahoma State. So not super likely there. You prepare for that Iowa State rematch, and the March Madness begins.
Yeah, and oh, man, that matchup BYU Iowa State, if it happens in the conference tournament, is going to be so fascinating. Just because like when Iowa State has its entire team healthy, when they're not missing anybody, they only have two losses all year. One is to number one Auburn at the buzzer, and one is to BYU in double overtime. So that Iowa State team is going to be really hungry. They're going to want revenge. They're really good. They're going to have a ton of fans there because it's like 4 hours south of campus, Kansas City. And you know BYU's going to have a tall task there. I mean, I predict BYU is going to go one and done in the Big 12 tournament. I don't think that's that bold a prediction because Iowa
Yeah.
State's good. But and you know what, like maybe that's the best thing that could happen to them too. Like play a good defense in Iowa State, get humbled a little, kind of like know you're this good of a team, but don't go into March Madness like with your head as high. It's kind of like BYU in the WCC tournament in 2020. Like they ended the season on a heater. They were a little too cocky, and then they got humbled by St. Mary's in the first round, right? And that really ugly, like I think it was 51-50 final score. Um, maybe like having that early exit gives you time to plan a bit more, get healthy, just kind of like recharge your batteries, kind of get your head in the right place. Obviously, it'd be great if they went farther in the Big 12 tournament, but like if they do lose to Iowa State in their first game, which I think is going to happen, like it's not the end of the world. I think it could benefit them, but it's going to be really interesting to see how they match up a second time because I mean that's as compelling television as you're going to find. Like a week ago, or earlier this week, like within 9 days, these two teams just met in double overtime, and now they're playing in the most important game of the season thus far. And there's a lot of insurance. Like it's just, I mean, it's this is what March is, right? It's just really good, high quality matchups with storylines and emotions. Like just nothing's better than this.
Yeah, I will say the one difference between the 2020 tournament and this one is that the 2021 happened at you guessed it, Orleans Arena,
Yeah,
which, not as fun of a place to play as I imagine a pretty cool place at T-Mobile in Kansas City. So, we shall see what happens there. I was going to double check. We talk about the Big 12, this league that both of these big programs are in. I was going to check on how many bids it's predicted that they're going to get into the tournament because, man, this league is just so good. And it's looking like right now, eight. Eight predicted teams from the Big 12 into the NCAA tournament, the Big Dance, which is just absurd. Like,
yeah. And I think the craziest part about that is this is like technically a down year for the Big 12, and they
right.
still get 8 teams in. Half the league is in the tournament. Like down year. Come on.
Craziness. We are 1 week out from Selection Sunday. This we're getting down to it, like I said. So fun times ahead. If you had to pick the ideal seed for BYU come Selection Sunday, what are you going with?
Probably a 7.
I
I
like it.
mean, play a 10 seed, kind of I mean, I know you said they've been mocked as a 5. I just don't see them getting. I think there's going to be too many other teams that are kind of like a sexier pick to put at a 5 seed for the committee, and then a 6 makes a lot of sense. But like, I haven't really looked at how like the whole Sunday play thing happens.
Yeah,
Last year, BYU should have been a 5, and they got the 6. This year, they probably should be a 6. So I'm just going to play it safe and say that they're a 7.
yeah,
And then you play a 10 seed. Like those are always fun games. And then your second round game will be cool too. Like, I mean, I think a 7, like just making the tournament this year with like a new squad and a new staff is definitely a win. But if they can win a game in the tournament this year, like that's just put a bow on it. Like that's a perfect first season of the Kevin Young era. And then next year you're ready for AJ. You're ready for liftoff with AJ. So
exactly. Speaking of perfect first seasons, great segue to move into our professional teams, Utah Hockey Club. In that playoff hunt. Unfortunately, kind of going lost win over the last few games. Staying right on the edge of that wild card spot. Last time out, they were, had a road trip out to Detroit and Chicago. 4-3 overtime loss to the Blackhawks. Tough spot to be in, but you do still get that overtime loss point. And then they return home tomorrow for a game against the Maple Leafs, which is no big deal, right? Just one of the best teams.
yeah,
Um, eh, so that should be a fun one. One of our buddies, Aaron Fitzner. Shout out Aaron Fitzner, going to be in town. It sounds like to go to that one. A Canadian himself. He was the OG Daily Universe sports editor. So it went Aaron, then me, then Jackson. So we kind of share that lineage, as it were, of sports editors.
name a better three-peat. I'll wait. Like that's like that's the Abraham Isaac Joseph of Daily Universe sports editors.
Dude, we need to do like a Last Dance documentary, but like for our three-peat, where it's just like goes from starting with Aaron and then down to like the fiasco with like we kind of have like a Dennis Rodman equivalent in our last year together there in the Daily Universe. I think we can make
Just
some
a
drama
little
out
bit,
of it.
but I think it was interesting too because like if you look at the timeline, like from when Aaron got there to when I left, like BYU went from like coming off the worst season in 40 years, like you bring in this really promising freshman class for football 2018. Like Kalani finally kind of gets the wheels turning, and then by the time I leave, they're in the Big 12. Mark Pope has got basketball going well. Like it was just such an iconic kind of like stretch of BYU athletics. Like you had the Zach Wilson COVID year, you had the Gonzaga win, you beat Utah. Just so many awesome. I mean, look, not to toot our own horn here, but like the best possible people to cover the best possible time frame.
Amen to
Just
that.
kind of just kind of flex a little.
Maybe Fitzner could bring some of that magic to the Delta Center tomorrow,
Yeah.
bringing that win for the hockey for the clubbers as we call them, possibly Mammoth. I've seen a couple pretty fun mock-ups of some
Yeah.
Mammoth logos
I'm all in on Mammoth.
with like the like delicate arch inside of the Mammoth,
Yeah.
which
I'm
which looks pretty sick.
I'm all about Mammoth, but I still think we should call them the Clubbers no matter what. Just because
Yeah.
like it's kind of like the Commanders, you still call them the football team sometimes. Like just it's who you are. Like and Clubbers works. Like Clubbers is sick. I would like to go on record. I think I was the first person to use Clubbers. I think there's evidence of that on Twitter. Like I started Clubbers, so like you don't need to throw me a parade or anything, but I do want my flowers within the fan base. But yeah, I mean like if they could like I mean, that tomorrow's game, there's a few like elite franchises within the NHL, right? Like there's Edmonton, there's the Penguins. I like to think the Capitals are kind of a new blood in terms of hockey. But then like you get Toronto, like the Toronto Maple Leafs, they don't really have the hardware to show it, but that's an iconic franchise, right? It's kind of like the Knicks, I feel like of the
Mm,
NHL.
good
No
comp.
hardware, but like
Yeah.
they're kind of in the middle of everything. They have celebrity fans, at least in Canada. Like I think Mike Myers is a big Leafs fan. Like that's about as big as a celebrity fan you're gonna find in hockey, right? Like so if you and then they have the best goal scorer in the sport right now in Austin Matthews, who ironically is American. He's from Arizona. So maybe he's got some vengeance on his mind for the long lost Coyotes. But
Oh, that's
I mean,
true.
if you could beat a team like the Maple Leafs on your home floor or your home ice, I guess, like that'd be an awesome message. Like we've talked about it every time I've been on this podcast. It's like it's all about building your brand, building your culture, kind of building like trying to stack these moments that you can build off of in the future for your franchise. And this would be an awesome opportunity to do that, right? Like I feel like, I mean, when the Penguins came, they lost in overtime. The Caps played them off the ice. They haven't really had that opportunity in their own building to knock off kind of like one of the big boys. And so I feel like if they could beat the Maple Leafs, that's such a big statement. That would be so awesome.
19 games left for the Utah Hockey Club to make the playoffs. 18 games left for the Utah Jazz to secure that top three odds in the NBA draft lottery. And
Capture the flag.
we are doing it, folks. We're losing 5 games in a row. We're leading scorer Kyle Filipowski. It's happening, people. The tank is fully engaged. If you haven't been looking at the Jazz injury report, it's obvious at this point. They're
That's,
they're they're dropping 9 guys, playing 9 guys, and we're just out here trying to get ping pong balls. So it's looking great down the stretch for the Jazz to get the odds. You want to put yourself in the right position to do that.
yeah. You ever see that meme? It's like it would be such a funny movie where like it's a Superman movie. This is kind of like a random tangent, but I promise it makes sense. It's like the Superman movie idea where the CIA is trying to assassinate Clark Kent because he's such a good journalist, but they can't and they can't figure out why. And it's because he's Superman, you know? I feel like that's the Jazz with the tank. Like, no matter how many players they have out, Will Hardy's just like too good a coach. So you're never gonna fully tank. Like, they're bad, but like they're too competitive. Like, I sweat it too much with the Jazz. Like, I want them to be like pitiful, and the Jazz are like kind of like for as bad as they are, they're still a sliver of like respectability. I don't want that. Like I want to be bad. Like I don't want to take any chances with this tank. Like Will Hardy's too good.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And here's where we'll end this one for the night. We'll give it a little winner, a little stat shout out here because our guy Walker Kessler
Oh, the best.
somehow managed 18 points, 25 rebounds in a loss.
And
Just
8 blocks.
and 8 blocks. He was one of like 6 players ever to have that stat line. And that same night, Jokic had his 30-20-20 game, which was the first time that stat line had ever been reached ever in the NBA. So just a couple iconic big men, Walker
Yeah.
Kessler and Nikola Jokic, just putting out incredible stat lines. So want to give shout out
It's
to them, and they're fulfilling the mission of their team, which for Kessler is to lose games, unfortunately at this point, and for Jokic it's to win MVPs. So
is this the apex mountain of big men? Walker Kessler is so awesome. I think you've touched on it. Like when Kessler plays, the difference is so staggering with the Jazz. He's kind of become the tanking X factor, and I really hope like you never know with Danny Ainge, right? Like he's so unpredictable as a what you call it as an executive. So I really hope Kessler's in their long term plans because like defensively there's no better shot blocker in the league. Maybe Wemby, but Wemby's a unicorn, right? Like that's just kind of comes with the territory. And he's gotten so much better offensively. Like his rebounding is better. Like, I mean, I feel like Walker Kessler's ceiling is so high. I want him to be the starting big when the Jazz are competitive 8, 9 years from now. Apparently, I guess
build,
that's the timeline. Is
build the
they're
statue
not
right
even
now.
the rebuild hasn't even started. Apparently, like who knows, man? Like it's the Jazz frustrate me. I just if you're gonna tank, just do it right. I mean, I like Will Hardy. It's just I'm being kind of facetious, but it's annoying how competitive they are, even with a terrible injury report. Like, come on, just lose, roll over, capture that flag.
You can't spell enigma without Ainge. So, that's what he is. He's an enigma. That might be true actually. There's a lot of similar letters there. Um, so
I think that's true.
uh, I,
Such,
I did think of
should
one
I
lot.
make that my should I make that my Twitter bio? You
That'd be
can't
great.
spell enigma without H.
One last shout out. Ovechkin. How many more goals to get the record?
9 away.
Wow. Like I said, 19 games in the season, right? Something like that. I'm sure it's different for each team, but around that number. So, here we go. Ovechkin, go Caps, get that record.
A great chase. Take that, Canada.
All righty. Well, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you next week.